Okay, we're going to get started. I'd like to welcome those who came in person. I appreciate it. I'm not by myself, and also those who are watching live stream, and I guess those who will watch it eventually if they choose to do so. So we have an interesting situation this year, which is not that uncommon based on recent patterns in the calendar. But we have Erev Pesach falling out on Shabbos. And there's an entire siman, which means a chapter in Shulchan Aruch, which is dedicated to this scenario. So that itself tells you that it warrants more attention. It's not the same as typical years. I'd like to begin with a story. I was telling Jason just a little bit earlier. It's a nice memory, and it actually does set the tone for why this year is important. So in 1974, which I know some here were not born yet, but in 1974, I was in third grade. And that year, Pesach fell out on Motzei Shabbos. So in other words, Shabbos was Erev Pesach. And I remember that in school, back in Columbus, the principal of the school, the head of school, was talking about this so unusual scenario of when Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. Now, as a kid, especially at that age, it didn't mean much to me. We were still having two Siddharim. My mother was doing all the work, cleaning the house. I wasn't really that engaged. But the reason why he made such a big deal about it is because the previous time that had happened was 1954. So in other words, there was a 20-year span, a drought, where this didn't happen. And as a result, people were out of practice. And I was thinking about this today, that my parents, no longer living, but at the time they were young teenagers. And then it happened again, meaning in 1954. And then when it happened again in 1974, they're adults, they have a family. So they had no frame of reference really to speak of. Having said that, it's happening this year. It's not going to happen again for another 20 years. Barring, and we hope this will be the case, Mashiach comes, and then we go back to the system of being Makadish V'chodesh with Adam. We use witnesses who are able to see the new moon, and then all bets are off. There's no formula. There's no calendar that's based on a formula, and it could happen much more often. So I have notes. The last time it happened, does anybody remember? It wasn't that long ago.
2020.
It was 2021. It was only 4 years ago, coming out of COVID. So we were so conditioned to what was unusual because we were davening in a tent and that whole year in Purim, and we were coming back into the shul, but we were not completely. Many people didn't want to daven inside. So the fact that Pesach fell out on Motzei Shabbos was not so unusual in the sense that we were dealing with unusual circumstances anyway. But I have here that in 2001 it happened, 2005, 2008. So that was 3 times within 1 decade. But again, you can have the drought. So this is where we are right now. As I said, there's an entire siman in Shulchan Aruch, a chapter devoted to the halachos. I have here, which we're not going to really reference tonight, but this is an entire sefer on the subject, which shows you that there are many halachos. We don't need to know everything, but we do have to be aware of what's different and be able to navigate, because if we're not alert and we're not focused, there could be problems. If we do everything the way it's advised, so then it should be no problem. One thing can be said before we get started with the schedule, meaning we'll work through starting with Thursday next week. One thing that has to be said is that there is no way that next Shabbos will be, you can't make next Shabbos into a routine Shabbos. It's impossible. We'll talk about the meals, but because of all of the halachas that we have to deal with, it's impossible. And you'll see why as we get into the information. It will be an unusual Shabbos, and that should be noted, meaning the diet will be different. Even in the days of the Shulchan Aruch, you have to be concerned about cholent and chametz clinging to pots. The diet, what we serve is different, how we serve it, and what we do on Shabbos also, disposing on chametz that we have to take care of on Shabbos. So davening times, there are a lot of differences. So let's get underway with that introduction. So we'll start with Thursday. Next Thursday is April 10th. Now, we have Siyum B'chorim. The firstborn from either a mother or father is supposed to fast. Now, typically, in a normal year, Siyum B'chorim is Erev Pesach, which means the night before we do B'dikas Chametz at nightfall. We take care of the chametz. We're ready to burn it the next day. We go to shul. The firstborn have to be there because they want to partake of the siyum. Because if they don't, they're supposed to fast, which would be difficult on Erev Pesach. And we go into Yom Tov. This year it's reversed. So Thursday is the tainus, and Thursday night is the bedika. So you say, well, what's the difference? Either way, the B'chorim have to go to a siyum, and we'll have to do b'dikas chametz. So it's an interesting point. We're not going to dwell on it, but what could happen is that a person could say that if I fast, and now I have the mitzvah b'dikas chametz, I'm too weak to do the b'dika. Normally, that's not an issue because the b'dika is before the fast. But if a person missed a siyum, and he's fasting, and now he has the mitzvah of b'dikas chametz, so he might say, I'm too weak to do the bedika. This is very akin to, it wasn't that long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. What's it akin to? We don't break the fast of Tainus Esther until after the Megillah because you have the mitzvah. People sometimes get hungry, so they're allowed to have a little bit something to eat or drink. So the truth is, if a person, a Bechor, who is fasting, which is unlikely that he's fasting because there's always a siyum, so then he'd be able to eat something. But that's just an interesting, where you see, because of the order being reversed, that might come up. Happens to be that the poskim say that because it's not really Erev Pesach, and the fast is not designated for Friday, because in general, we don't want to have a fast on Friday because then it affects our mood going into Shabbos. There's only one fast that falls out on Friday, which we observe on Friday. We had it this past year, and it's very strange because we break the fast with Kiddush, not water. You can't have water before Kiddush. Which fast is that? Asar B'Teves. We just had it. It's a short fast, so it can fall out on Friday. So we never. Purim is another example. When Purim is Motzei Shabbos, we don't make the fast on Friday, we make the fast on Thursday. So that's Thursday morning. There will be the siyum. But there are poskim who say that if a person missed the siyum, meaning a Bechor, he doesn't have to fast because it's not really the Zman of the fast. It's a day early. It's not Erev Pesach. That's an interesting halacha. There's other things that might be done, and that is to give money as a redemption for the fast, a pidyon for the fast. But that's Thursday morning, April 10th. We'll have the siyum after davening. We go about our business Thursday. Thursday night is b'dikas chametz. And what is unusual is that even though we're doing b'dikas chametz Thursday night, typically we are now counting the hours, so to speak. We're aware that the time is ticking, that we're going to have to stop eating chametz the next morning and burn the chametz the next morning. This year it's different because the next morning is Erev Shabbos, and if anything, we would say we can't rid ourselves completely of chametz because we have to deal with the meals for Shabbos. And that's really where it gets the most complicated, how to negotiate the meals on Shabbos. Typical Erev Pesach, you don't have to eat, and you're not supposed to have full meals anyway, because you want to go into Yom Tov with an appetite, but on Shabbos you're supposed to eat. You have to have 3 meals, and you're supposed to enjoy Shabbos, and that's where the tension arises. So the meals are really where people get the most thrown. Like, how do you negotiate Lechem Mishnah along with the chiyuv of the pseudos, but at the same time you have to deal with chametz because that doesn't change. You can't eat chametz past 10:21 next Shabbos. You have to have chametz destroyed. Obviously, you can't burn it on Shabbos, but all chametz has to be destroyed by 11:38. So, how does that work together. It seems that they're opposites, opposing forces, and somehow they find a way to be resolved. So we'll get to that. But now we're up to Thursday night. So you have Bedikas Chametz. Thursday night, really, the Bedika is the same as any other year. However you do it in a typical year, so that's what you'll do on Thursday night. Comes Friday morning, so there's no siyum. We just covered that. There's also something different about davening. Nat, you'll tell us what's the difference about davening because it's not Erev Pesach. Every Erev Pesach, we omit 2 tefillos. Tachnin, we're already not saying. But what are the 2 tefillos that we omit on Erev Pesach? Because it's considered to be a minor yontif. They would shech the korban Pesach on Erev Pesach. So we don't say Mizmor L'Soda, which was for the korban Toda, which was brought voluntarily, but 10 of the 40 loaves of the korban Toda, the Thanksgiving offering, were chametz. And you can't bring a korban where you're forcing it to be abbreviated in terms of the amount of time to eat it. And you won't be able to, you won't have the 2 days with the intervening night. You won't have it because Pesach interrupts it. You can't eat the korban Toda once Pesach, the Sozman Achila, once it's already midday according to the Torah on Erev Pesach. Therefore, there is no Mizmor L'Soda on Erev Pesach. But Friday's not Erev Pesach, so we'll say Mizmor L'Soda. One more thing that we say, we don't omit. Very good. We do say Lam Natseach Yancha Hashem b'Yom Tzara. In theory, it's a Yom Tzara in the sense that it's not a Yontif. Tomorrow, Erev Shabbos is also a minor yontif in the sense that it's Erev Pesach. In the days of the Beis Hamikdash, they actually brought the korban Pesach on Shabbos. I mean, they shechted it on Shabbos, and the korban was brought. Obviously, we don't have that. We hope to return to that. So that's Friday morning with the davening. So it's really what you would call a normal davening for Chodesh Nisan. Now, what about burning the chametz? You could argue that to burn the chametz on Friday is maybe counterproductive because am I really ridding myself of the chametz? First of all, I can eat it all day and I can eat it Friday night and I can eat it Shabbos morning until 10:21. Not only that, I have a chiyuv once Shabbos arrives to have a suda with lechem mishnah. And we'll talk about why matzah is not an option. So I have to deal with chametz. So why do I burn the chametz? So this is already in the Shulchan Aruch that we want to make it as normal as possible, as if it's a typical year. So even though one could argue, fine, you have to destroy the chametz that you found, you did bedikas chametz, and the minhag is to leave 10 small pieces of bread, and you have to burn it. And really, in theory, I could burn it all day, but we still burn it at the regular time as if it were Erev Pesach. So this is where maybe we can get confused. It feels like Erev Pesach, but it's not Erev Pesach. But in as much as that we have Bedikas Chametz on Thursday night, followed by Bir Chametz on Friday, and it should be burnt by 11:38 a.m., that much is the same, okay? So the 10 pieces of bread that you have from the Bedika, that should be burnt on Erev Pesach, on Friday, which is not Erev Pesach, Erev Shabbos, by 11:38. That's the same. What's different is that you can still deal with chametz.
Do you make the declaration?
We'll get to that. But you can still deal with chametz because it's not Erev Pesach, and I have many more hours yet where I'm allowed to enjoy chametz. So if a person wanted to, if the restaurant's open and you wanted to get a chametz meal in, you'd be allowed to. If a person wanted to go to a bakery, assuming that it would be open. The only thing is advised that don't overdo it with chametz, and almost to condition ourselves for Pesach and not to have a problem with leftover chametz and what am I going to do when it's the Zman HaBir where I have to get rid of it and it's not a weekday, it's Shabbos. So it's better not to start buying chametz and splurging. But in theory, I can still own it. I can still eat it. I can derive benefit from it. So to answer Ben's question, you would not say the Kol Chamira. That's usually recited after burning the chametz. Because even if you were to recite it, it would be counterproductive in as much as that you're forced to deal with chametz for what? For Shabbos. So that's the halacha. So you burn the chametz without kol chamira. So if we just now take a breath and we think about it, we already have, besides the davening, we pointed that out. Happens to be that Shabbos Hagadol, which is Erev Pesach, Shabbos Hagadol is Erev Pesach. There's also questions about the davening, but we don't have to focus on that. That's not, we'll do it right, Bezos Hashem. But what's going on in your own homes, that you have to know. So we already pointed out that there's this reverse order of the siyum for the Bechorim, and then the Dika that follows Thursday night. And now the burning of the chametz will be done in its normal time, but you will not recite kol chamira. The nullification would be counterproductive. Okay. And we're advising, don't buy chametz, don't overdo it, because you don't want to have leftover chametz in your pockets, in your possession, and you want to be able to make sure that you're going into Shabbos with the least amount of chametz possible. Okay, so what will you be doing on Friday? Well, how do you see it unfolding? You would really be getting ready for Shabbos and Yontif. It's your last chance. So if there's any tasks to perform, any errands, so this is your chance. What's another interesting halacha, and we're lenient, is that on Erev Pesach, when it's really Erev Pesach, so what are you supposed to refrain from after midday? You can't do malacha as if it were, what's a good example of what's comparable? The same, what's allowed on Erev Pesach after Chatzos is that which you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. But that which you're not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed, let's say I wouldn't be able to take my shoes to get them repaired on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. Another classic example is a haircut and shaving. You're not supposed to do that after Chatzos. You have the deadline because it's like Chol HaMoed. But this Erev Shabbos is not Erev Pesach. So therefore, even though an argument could be made that you shouldn't do malach after Chatzos, but we're mekel. So the rest of the day, other than not dealing with chametz and buying chametz and making chametz because your kitchen is already kashered, but you can go about your business. Okay. So that will be Friday afternoon. Now Shabbos comes. You have to realize that by Friday night, really all of your Pesach preparations have to be done. What can you do now once it's Shabbos? You can't cut tape and start lining cabinets. You can't kosher anymore. Even if somehow the fire, you wouldn't be dealing with bishul, but why can't you kosher kalim on Shabbos? It's a violation of what? It's considered like you're repairing. It's tikkun mana. You're repairing the kli. So you don't kosher. So for all intents and purposes, once Shabbos arrives, you have to be ready for Pesach. There's really nothing more to do. I left out deliberately what else would take place on Erev Pesach, typically when you're burning the chametz. It's now a minhag in all of Klal Yisrael that everyone does it, meaning they do it through the proxy of the rabbi or Bezdin.
Selling
the chametz. So that's an interesting topic unto itself, and that we're not really getting into, but I'll just share with you some of what's discussed in the poskim, is that if you sell the chametz, let's say at the same time that you burn the chametz, so are you creating a problem for people who are still dealing with chametz until later in the day? Meaning, if the mechira is chal, if it's effective at by 11:38, which is, or actually we sell it after the end of eating and during the zman of the burning. So if you sell the chametz by 11:38, so that shtar mechira, the document says, well, all chametz, but now he bought new chametz. So is that included in the mechira? It's a done deal. So how is it included? So now the person doesn't have the safety net of the mechira if he has new chametz that he bought. If the mechira is chal at its normal, chal means if it's effective at its normal time. Now you have to realize, even if we postpone the effective time of the sale, but what will the sale not include? What will it not include? You're going to the lechem mishnah, or you're going to use for Shabbos. So that's a little tricky, which we're deliberately not getting into how to word the star so that people can still have the benefit of the mechira even after the zman of burning, the time of burning the chametz. That's not something that everyone has to worry about per se. It's on the one who sells the chametz, how he structures it in the star. But that just shows you that it's a unique situation. I'll mention one more thing about the mechira, then we'll move on to Friday night. What's interesting is that what would be the best case scenario if you do the mechira in terms of the transactions, all of the kinyanim on Friday, but you write in the star the effective date is not right before Shabbos, but the effective zman, the time for the mechira to be chal would be when? Not now, but on Shabbos. On Shabbos at 11:37 a.m., 1 minute before the zman habiur. Is that permissible? Does that violate Shabbos? You're not supposed to do transactions on Shabbos, right? We don't. So if I do all of the Maisa Kinyanim Erev Shabbos, and I just want it to be chal, so then if you think about it, that would be great because all of the people who have leftover bread, it's sold. Yeah. And just put it with the chametz. And anything that obviously you don't want it to be around, so you eat it, God forbid. But I don't have to worry about destroying it and flushing it down the toilet, which we'll get to soon. I can say that it's not really a problem. I can put it in the closet with the rest of the chametz. That's also a discussion in the poskim. Rabbi Kiva Eger says that it's a violation of Shabbos, even if you do the Maisa Kinyanim Erev Shabbos and it takes effect on Shabbos. Some argue, but that would be an easy way of structuring the sale. That would be great, right? That you do all of the Maisa Kinyanim with the Goy Erev Shabbos. Do it fine at 11 o'clock, 11:30, whatever it is. But you write in the star, this will be effective on what Shabbos? April 12th? Is that the date? So on Shabbos, April 12th, at 11, let's say 11:37, this all takes effect. That would be very convenient. Tell you a quick story. In 2001, we had this scenario. So there was a wedding. A local girl from Columbus, got married in Columbus, and the boy is from Baltimore. So Rabbi Heinemann was the Masader Kiddushin. So we're at the wedding, and I asked Rabbi Heinemann, having in mind this shaila of when should the mechira take effect. So I asked Rabbi Heinemann, if you know Rabbi Heinemann, he likes to use humor when he can, and a little biting humor too. So I said, Rabbi Heinemann, when are you selling your chametz this year? And he said, before Pesach. Meaning, when is it effective? And he was saying, I'll take care of it. I'll do my part before Pesach. But then he said, Rabbi Kiva Eger, I asked him, will you let it be chal on Shabbos? And he said, no, because of this Rabbi Kiva Eger. So that becomes another issue, just how to structure the mechira. But that, again, it's not something that you have to be worried about.
We do have to be worried about it. Let's say we want to put something away on Shabbos.
So
could you have it tonight?
So I'll explain how to deal with it. Right. I'll give you the practical way of dealing with to avoid the shilas.
Could you have a condition to say that it doesn't include the chametz I want?
That's what we're going to talk about. Okay. But I just wanted to, because it's something that is relevant on Friday. It's part of the Friday scenario, and normally you don't have to worry about it because when you do the mechira, it's chal. Usually we finish all the kinyanim maybe 10 minutes before the zman habiur. It's really, and the way my star is worded in the typical year, it's a non-issue. This year it becomes more of a consideration. But notwithstanding, if we were able to not, let's say, be careful for Rabbi Akiva Eger's concern, so then we would say, let it be chal tomorrow. And that would take care of it. So barring that, what do you do? So that's what we're getting to now. So Friday night, Shabbos enters, you come to shul, davening Friday night's the same. It's just Shabbos, the Shabbos Hagadol. And you daven, you go home. Okay, the house is all ready for Pesach. Now, what do you do about Lechem Mishnah? This is really where there are different customs and different options. There are more than two options, but really what's suggested are only two options. What I'm going to tell you now is what's most practical and advisable, and it still doesn't mean that it's foolproof. You have to be alert. You have to be focused. You have to know the zmanim. You have to be aware at home when the sov zman achila is and when the sov zman biur is, when the latest time for eating chametz and the latest time when chametz has to be disposed of. You have to know that. That's on everybody, just like any other year. But again, it's Shabbos. And what I'm going to tell you is the easiest way to negotiate the meals without having problems and shilas that might come up. So there are two options. The easiest option, and I'm not embarrassed to say that this is what I've done for all of the scenarios. Can't tell you back in 74 and 77 and 81, although I think it was the same option. And when I started making Pesach myself, it happened in 94. And then again, 2001, we went through a lot of the years. I always rely on matzah ashira, and that is colloquially called what?
Egg
Egg matzah. Egg matzah. So let's talk about matzah ashira first, and then we'll talk about if you do it the way the Shulchan Aruch actually suggests, because his language is that you leave over for the two pseudos of Shabbos. And we'll get to Shalosh Seudos also. This is where it becomes a little more complicated. But Friday night is less complicated. It's just one meal. You have to have 3 meals on Shabbos. 1 meal is supposed to be at night and 2 meals during the day. And everyone knows that. But you need to have 3 meals on Shabbos. If the third meal, Shalosh Seudos, has to be in the afternoon, so then already you have to concede that you're out of options when it comes to Lechem Mishnah. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We'll get to Shalosh Seudos a little bit later. But let's talk about Friday night. So the convenience of egg matzah, and it's actually suggested when there are little kids in the house, because it's very, very hard to control little kids when it comes to challah and running around and leaving crumbs, and who knows what's going to happen. So it's almost, I felt that it's the safest. And over the years, there's, as I said, there's svarim on this topic, and I see in some of the svarim that I like to refer to, that there were great rabbanim, tzaddikim, that opted for matzah ashira. The catch is that matzah ashira is not really bread. Matzah is bread. Bread, meaning challah, obviously is lechem. Matzah shira, if we wanted to halachically give it its categorization to qualify it, it's not really bread. If you wanted to give an example of what matzah shira is, egg matzah, it's more what we would call cake or crackers. What bracha do you make on Ritz crackers? Mazonos. What bracha do you make on cake? Mazonos. Easy. So why are we making hamotzi on egg matzah? People who think that egg matzah is real matzah, it's a mistake. It's called pas haba b'kisnin. There's different definitions of pas haba b'kisnin: crackers, cakes, and pies. A lot of different examples, but pas haba b'kisnin can be elevated to the category of bread. Matzah ashira, according to the Shulchan Aruch, is not chametz. It's kneaded with mei peiros, with fruit juices. Egg yolks is a different topic, but let's just say that's also matzah shira, hence egg matzah, and it's not chametz. So according to the Shulchan Aruch, Sfardim, they can eat egg matzah the entire Pesach. The Ashkenazim, we don't. But at the same time, even according to the Chumrah of the Ashkenazim, it's not chametz. It's not chametz. So this becomes the perfect solution, that if somehow it can be elevated to the status of bread, and I can use it for lechem mishnah, and I'll eat it as if it were matzah, and I don't have to worry that it's chametz if there's any crumbs left over, even though I should be attentive to it because we don't eat it on Pesach, but I didn't bring chametz into my house. And this way, I'm Yotzei Lechem Mishnah, and I don't have to worry about the Isser of Chometz. There was a Turkish Gaon, a great rabbi in the late 18th, early 19th century, Rabbi Chaim Palaji. And just to show you that this is a very valid option. And he said in his city, Izmir, Turkey, that was the custom. When Pesach fell out on Motzei Shabbos, Erev Pesach was Shabbos, everyone used matzah ashira. Now, for the Sephardim, they can use it even for shalshodas, and in fact, that's what the Mechaber he suggests. They can use it for shalshodas later in the day. But for us, it's important to keep in mind that we only eat egg matzah until the latest time that you can eat, fill in the blank, the latest time that you can eat chametz. But at least if it's in the house, I don't have to worry about it as if I'm leaving over chametz. So I consider that to be a very, very viable option. Excuse me?
Make hamotzi on it? Or
Right,
you make
so-
mazonos?
No, you make hamotzi. So let me just give a little bit more background to it. I told you in 1974, this came up, where Pesach fell out on Motzei Shabbos. Erev Pesach Shachalios b'Shabbos. That's really the title. Erev Pesach is on Shabbos. Ramosha wrote a tshuva in 1974 dealing with this scenario. Now, it makes sense why he wrote a tshuva in 1974, because it was 20 years. But it happened to be that in 1954, there was a Torah journal. There's a certain historical aspect to this now. And many Rabbanim in this Torah journal in 1954 came out against this Eitzah, this idea or solution of using egg matzah. So Ramosha himself, after a very long tshuva, he says that it's a valid option. And he actually says, for those who are worried because of children, I went through the tshuva today, he says it's a viable option. And that's what I do. Now, Ben, you asked hamotzi. So you have to realize that I'm not eating it as a snack. I'm eating it, I'm using it as if it's lechem. So that itself elevates it. And I'll eat as much as I usually eat of matzah. Or if I had bread, I would eat the same amount. So that is how it's lechatchila. It requires netilas yadayim and hamotzi. I mean, it sounds maybe, I don't know how you would relate to this, but if somebody said, you know what I want for lunch? I'm not talking about on Pesach. I'm talking about any day of the week. You know what I want for lunch? I want a whole Entenmann's cake. That's my lunch. And the volume is, let's say, 4 bayim, 4 egg volume, according to the shear. And he says, this is my meal. I'm not eating anything else. I'm eating cake. Cake is my lunch. So he would wash, in theory, make al and you said pizza. So that's what Ramosha talked about. Usually the shear, when should you wash for pizza?
More than 2 slices?
Right. The 2 slices is still considered a snack. The question is, when does it become a meal? So here it's easier because it's Shabbos, and Shabbos there's a chiyuv suda. So they say even if you don't eat that much of it, you have to eat enough to be able to bench. But the Shabbos context itself elevates it to more of a kfiyus. So it's more of an established, you're treating it like bread. But especially you'll eat enough that you would normally consume as if it were matzah, real matzah. So practically, yes, you would wash on the tilas yadayim and hamotzi and bench, but it's a beautiful solution because now I don't have to worry so much about the crumbs.
For Ashkenazim, up until...
And this is for Ashkenazim up until, and we're still Friday night, but this will be the Eitzah for Lechem Mishnah. What's the rest of the meal? On Pesach, Dick, right?
Yeah.
Am I going to be serving chametz? I didn't really get into why that's not an option. We can talk about it, but the point is, it's a Pesach meal in terms of what's being served. Everything is kosher Pesach. The house was prepared, but I took care of my Lechem Mishnah. That's a very easy solution. Notwithstanding those who object, but if you go, Ramosha says that it's okay, and that's, as I said, that's my minhag. I don't even think about challah at that point. Okay, why can't you use matzah? Just use matzah. You're going to eat a lot of matzah over Pesach, so why can't you just start early, one day early? What's the reason?
allowed to have.
What's the reason?
They have to have a tom.
Okay, so right now, are people eating matzah? Are people eating matzah right now? It's about a week and a half before Pesach. Are people eating matzah? Maker adin, you could, right? Is there a minhag not to? Is there a minhag not to eat matzah right now?
I think there's several minhag.
Okay, so let's say the most
Nisan,
common minhag, Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So that's a minhag. Interestingly enough, Ramosha explains this in his tshuva, the minhag of not eating matzah from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and some even start earlier from when? From the, 30 days prior to Pesach. It's based on the prohibition that's found in the Yushalmi that you're not allowed to eat matzah on Erev Pesach. Okay? And that is paskin in the Shulchan Aruch, that we don't eat matzah on Erev Pesach. That's why matzah is not an option when it comes to Erev Pesach Shachalios b'Shabbos. You can't have matzah. Now the question is, what's the reason? Yushami gives a very interesting comparison. He says somebody who would eat matzah on Erev Pesach, it would be like someone who had relations with his. Now, if I say fiance, it's not really accurate because fiance means there's no formal kinyan. But it used to be in the days of the Mishnah that they would do kiddushin, and they would wait some time, and then they would do nesuin. So the ring was given. She's mu'ureses, but where's she living? She's not my wife yet in terms of husband and wife. She's still living with her father, my future father-in-law. So the Yushalmi says if somebody would eat matzah, Erev Pesach, it's as if he had relations with his kala before the nesuin, when she's still yet in her father's house. Ramosha has pages to explain what exactly does the Yushalmi mean. But to simplify it, the idea is that when you're already close to the mitzvah, so you don't spoil it by jumping the gun. You don't do something that's a reshus when you're already in the sphere of the mitzvah. That explains the custom, by the way. Why from Purim? It's not just to have a taste for matzah. One could argue, you know what? If I don't eat matzah for a few hours, I'm already excited about matzah. Some people like matzah. The idea is that your first encounter when the mitzvah is already in play, meaning you're getting close to the zman of the mitzvah, so then you shouldn't be eating it outside of the context of a mitzvah. So in other words, when it comes to the husband, he shouldn't have relations with his betrothed before it's actually a mitzvah. When is it a mitzvah? Only after chuppah. It's not a mitzvah before chuppah. So we're not getting into, it's not adultery, she's his wife. And it's not necessarily some act of pritzus per se, but it's not in the context of the mitzvah because it's lacking the chuppah. So Ramosha says that you have to define when is that period of when it's already now within the context of the mitzvah. Some would say 30 days before Pesach. Why? Because what are you supposed to do 30 days before Pesach? You start learning the halachas, so therefore you don't eat matzah. Some say Rosh Chodesh Nisan because the other opinion, Rosh Ben Gamliel, says it's 2 weeks before Pesach. But one thing is for sure, Erev Pesach, you feel it coming because you're doing the Bedika, you're doing the Bior, you're at the Korban Pesach. That's just some of the lumdus, some of the explanation. Bottom line is matzah is not an option. It's not an option. What about Friday night? Maybe that's only from the morning, alos hashachar. So maybe Friday night have matzah. So the Magen Avram says you shouldn't do it Friday night either.
It's still Erev Pesach.
Well,
night, right?
But it could be only from alos hashachar. That's a machlokas.
So I'm concerned that the matzah shira makes it look like we're having matzah.
So that's the beauty of it. It's like it's not matzah. You can't be yotze the mitzvah matzah with matzah shira. That's why some of the other options that are given but are not used is, let's say you take real matzah and you put it into hot water, you soak it. So then, it has to be muvushalas, not just soak. It has to be muvushalas. So if, let's say, it doesn't totally disintegrate and dissolve, but you put it in scalding water, so you can't be yosei the mitzvah of matzah. That meaning real shmura matzah, but you put it in, you cooked it. Gebrachs. So some say maybe that's, and there's a lot of different ideas. Maybe you bake matzah and you say you don't want it to be l'shem matzah's mitzvah. If you ever go to a bakery, a matzah bakery, and they have all of their team there. It's a very interesting experience. I used to do it when I lived closer to New York. And they would always say after every, when they would start the new session, every 18 minutes is a new session, right? And they would sand down the rolling pins, and they would give like a little chunk of dough, and you would roll it out. That's what I used to do, and roll out, join the line there, the assembly line, and make it really as thin as possible. It's not as easy as it looks. And they would always say l'shem matzahs mitzvah. Matzahs mitzvah, in other words, so let's say, no, I made matzah, it's not chametz, but I didn't want it to be for the mitzvah. So okay, that's an option. There are technical issues why these don't fly. So really what you're left with is the egg matzah, and that answers Avinom. Your question is that you can't be yotzei, so it's a fine option, other than the fact it's not really chametz, but it's a fine option. Okay. If you go with the egg matzah option, you really, and you're serving Pesach Dika food, you can really be eating at your table. You don't have to eat somewhere else. Because again, the crumbs, you'll sweep up, you'll clean up, you have disposable tablecloths, everyone uses them, and so it's no problem. That's what makes it so easy. You're basically starting Pesach an extra day, a day early, and that's your Lechem Mishnah. And really, if everybody said that's what I want to do, we're almost done. We're almost done with this year. We only have to talk about Shalosh Chodesh the next day. But that's what everything is Pesach, and you use the Lechem Mishnah. You use egg matzah for the Lechem Mishnah. However, let's say you don't want to do it that way for whatever reason. It's not what the Shulchan Aruch actually says to do. So now you want to use real challah. So what do? How do you have challah and also you don't compromise your Pesach environment? How do you do that? That's not easy. So is anybody here, do you use challah in this scenario? Have you done that? What do they do in the hotels? You guys that go to the hotel?
They put in they keep it wrapped.
They give you challah though.
Yeah, I can't remember if they make the bracha. I'm not sure you can use it really because they just like leave it in the sealed wrapping. I forget exactly what it was.
Do they use disposable, Caleb?
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, I didn't mention that, but even if you use egg matzah, the second scenario, if you use bread, for sure you should use. You don't want to use your Pesach dishes. But if you use egg matzah, still this is what the poskim say. So if someone says that no, I don't want to because I want it to be more Shabbosdik, I don't like disposable. I'm telling you now what the poskim recommend to avoid problems, and therefore you do it. You don't say, I told you before that this is not going to be a regular Shabbos. There are certain things about it that you can't get around. And I would say this is one of them, highly, highly suggested, because we have the benefit, the convenience of disposable. That's what you should use. If you're using egg matzah, you could argue it's not as critical, but still it's advisable. But if you're using challah, then for sure, and I'm assuming in the hotels that it's disposable for Shabbos, yeah, for sure. But not on Pesach. Pesach, then it's real cutlery, right? So that I should have mentioned earlier, that you should want to use disposable cutlery, disposable plates, everything disposable. Now, you can use challah. This is what's advised, okay? And I highly recommend that you follow this. But it's more technical because you have Hilchos Suda, laws of Suda that start coming, that are brought to bear on this scenario. So I'm going to tell you how to do it. And in LA, it's not so difficult because the weather will cooperate. I looked at the forecast and it's supposed to be nice and no rain. And this is what I would recommend. But it doesn't have to be outside. But this is what you should do either way. You make Kiddush in a place that's not where you're going to have your Pesach Seder. If anything, let your Shabbos table be ready. If you can, let it be ready for the Seder already, meaning have your Seder table set going into Shabbos. At the very least, what do you benefit from that? At the very least, what are you supposed to do any year when it comes to the Seder? What are you supposed to do? You're not supposed to delay. You're supposed to start right away. So it would be much better, right, if your table's ready before Shabbos, so you'll eat somewhere else. And hence, just another example of where it's not going to be the same. It's not going to be like a regular Shabbos. Okay? I'm not telling you that if you use egg masa, you can't use your Shabbos table and you can't use regular Pesach cutlery, etc. It's not advisable. But if you're using chametz, for sure, you're not going to want to use your table. You want to do it somewhere else. The best case scenario is that you make kiddush, you make hamotzi, you eat. How much challah do you have to eat in order to justify netilos yadayim, which is what we do on? You have to eat a kabeya, right? A little bit more. So therefore, you wash and you eat. Make sure that you have, let's say, the equivalent of 2 slices of challah. Okay, and you're doing this somewhere else. Let's say you're doing it outside. The crumbs are not going to be so much of an issue, right? You're outside and you'll still clean up, but make sure you don't have leftovers. You're not using big challahs. You have to really make sure that you're not overdoing it with the challah. Okay? Now, what about the meal? So you shake out your clothes, go to wherever you want to have your meal. This is what's a way of preventing any real cross-contamination. Have your meal. What are you serving? Pesach food, undisposable. And you're not done yet. And then when you're finished with your meal, go back to where you made kiddush and had your challah and have more challah. Now you'll say, why do I have to do this? What's the reason? Because if I wash and if I make kiddush, wash and eat the challah, and then finish my meal on side, I'm separating the bread from the rest of the meal. So this is not a Pesach issue. What is it? It's a Hilchos Brachos issue. Because there's a concept of Moshe Chiyodim Yinapas. Here I made hamotzi, and the bread's not even on the table anymore. I left the bread outside, and now I'm inside. So I can't, even if I had in mind to do this, it could be that now anything I eat inside or at the table requires a bracha. The only way around that is that I have in mind I'm going to eat some here and some there, but I go back to where I started and I eat more bread, and that way it's not as if I really left the bread completely. I go back to the bread. That is the best way of dealing with this scenario, because you'll have Lecha Mishnah with challah. You won't have any shilos and hilchos brachos, but as long as you make sure that you have no crumbs and you're not bringing the chametz inside, then you can have your normal meal. It'll be a Pesach Dika meal, and then you'll go back outside to bench. That, in my opinion, is the best case scenario. If weather wouldn't permit, so you could do it somewhere else in the house. Sometimes people, back when I was living in the Midwest, people would say, oh, we're going to the basement and we're going to, it's not very Shabbostic to have your meal in the basement. But the point is, you don't want to do it on the same, you don't want to bring challah to the same table that you're going to be having your Seder at, and it's Pesach, but you have to have another. So now, do you do that? Do you have another auxiliary place where you have the challah?
On the patio.
Yeah.
But we have the whole meal on the patio.
You could do that too. Right. If weather permits, you could do that. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. That's very good. I don't know why I didn't say that. That actually makes it easier, right? You have the whole meal on the patio. So that's the benefit of living in California, in Southern California, that you can, at this time of year already, you can do it outside. But for those who are listening and maybe don't have that option, so then just remember that you can make a kiddush on a motzi, go inside or go elsewhere to have your Pesach Friday night meal, and then go back to where you started with kiddush and have another kazayas of bread, and that way you show that the meal never ended with bread. And you bench.
If you have it outside and you go back, and you have it outside,
You can do everything, but you just have to make sure that
people that are going inside to get the food from the kitchen or
right. So that's why, to avoid the serving issues, that's a very good point. To avoid the serving issues, you're not going to bring any Pesach kalim to where the chametz is. So you have to have even serving platters or utensils that are disposable. But again, the Pesach, the food that you're eating should be Pesach dik. The Shulchan Aruch talks about that what happens if you have leftovers that are chametz and it's clinging to your pots and pans. What do you do now? And you'll say, well, I'll wash them. Well, you can't wash them in your sink. That's already kosher. So I'll wash them in the bathroom sink. That's not kosher. That's true, but what are you not allowed to do? You can't wash on Shabbos if you're not going to use it after. So you have hachana issues, tircha issues. That's why you have to use disposable. It's very, very important. But Avinon's point is also very well taken, that anything brought to the table should be disposable. You shouldn't, and the Shulchan Aruch Mishnah Berurah talks about this actually, don't pour. You wouldn't pour, let's say, Pesach Dika soup from a Pesach Dika pot, the Kli Rishon, into Chametz Keilah. You wouldn't do that. That could cross-contaminate. That could cause trouble. So let's just make sure we got it straight, that you make hamotzi on challah. You're not in your area, which is where the seder is going to be. Let's say you're outside. That's very good. You have your whole meal outside. Serve Pesach food, but you serve it on disposable utensils, and also the serving utensils should be disposable. Okay. Now, what will be easy is that if you're outside, you'll sweep up. It won't be that much crumbs. Again, you have to be mindful of this. You can't have a lot of chametz left over. You can't, because how are you going to dispose of it tomorrow, meaning Shabbos? What are you going to do? You're not going to burn it. And there's only so much where you're going to throw it in your garbage. So then that's the old shaila. My garbage cans are on my property. And if I own my garbage cans, that means I still own it. You don't want to deal with that. You want to have as little chametz as possible. So you want to make sure that really you're eating, and the only thing that's left are crumbs, and crumbs can be disposed of. You can't burn them. We're not quite there yet, but we're almost. What will you do with the crumbs the next day on Shabbos day? What will you do with them? What you say? You'll flush them down the toilet. And it will be safe for your tank because it's only just a few crumbs. Okay, so that's Friday night. Shabbos morning, we're almost done. Shabbos morning, you have to be concerned with the Sof Zman Achila. What time is Sof Zman Achila? We said 10:21 for Valley Village. Okay, so you got to start davening earlier. Can't eat before you daven. You got to daven. And you have to have enough time to get them and have some sort of meal. Here's where there's different customs. And again, I'm going to tell you what's advised and what's called from the Mishnah Berurah and beyond, the way to do it. The way to do it. Gets a little complicated if you want to be Makayim Shalosh Shudas with Lechem Mishnah. Because matzah, we already said, is not an option. And you want to have maybe my first suggestion, which was egg matzah, but you can't have egg matzah after 10:31. And what time do we normally have shalosh shudas? In the afternoon. So then you're out of options. Unless you're a Sephardi, then you would have egg matzah in the afternoon, right? Can't have egg matzah all day either. Not because, according to the Sephardim, it's chametz, but what's the other consideration? You're not supposed to have on Erev Pesach, or Erev Yontif for that matter, are supposed to have, but especially Erev Pesach, you can't have something that is made of the 5 grains after what hour? After 9 hours of the day pass. Because you have to go into Yontif with an appetite, and on Erev Pesach, you can't have that which is used for matzah. So you couldn't have cookies. You couldn't have matzah meal cookies, let's say after 4 o'clock on Erev Pesach.
Why is the distinction for Ashkenazi, that 10:21, that you have to cut off the egg matzah, or is the Sephardim?
Because they eat egg matzah
what's the reason that that Ashkenaz would stop at that?
Because once the Ramah says that we don't eat egg matzah on Pesach, so then the custom is, there were those that argued and said maybe you have a little bit more time. And that becomes an issue if somebody wakes up late. And if there's time, I can tell you some of the shilas that are dealt with. But we're just getting through the practical. If you do everything right, which is hard enough, that this is what you need to know. So Shalosh Shudas is going to be more, it makes it more complicated. But getting back to Shabbos morning, so you're davening early. So we're going to daven at 6:45. We'll be done because there's no delay. There's no kiddush or anything like that. We'll be done davening. If we start at 6:45, I think we'll be done by 8:15. I think it'll be an hour and a half. That gives you 2 hours.
It's typically what it
Right,
is,
so
7 a.m.
The question is, what are you going to do now? You're going to have your normal, it's kind of early, you're going to have your normal Shabbos meal. So Pesach Dika, you're going to have your Pesach Dika cholent that early. So this is what's advised. This is the custom. I'm not saying it's impossible to do it a different way, but this is what you should do. And this is what the Gedolim of yesteryear did. So we don't need to try to, come up with our new ways of dealing with it. We'll do what they did, and this is what the Mishnah Berurah says to do. So you'll come home from shul. It's before the Sosman Achila. If you're using egg matzah, make kiddush, make hamotzi, what are you going to eat? So they talk about eating something that's very simple. Cold food. What's cold food? Herring, gefilte fish, whatever. If you want chopped liver, whatever, but something that is quick. Maybe it's going to be parve. It won't be any meat at all. Maybe it'll be yogurt. I don't know. Something easy. You'll eat that. That will be meal number 2. And you have, if you're using bread, meaning challah, real chametz, it's the same thing, like Friday night, but it's a quick meal. It's not a long meal. Because, first of all, if it's chametz, and the challah is chametz, obviously, then you got to finish by 10:21. But even if you're not so worried about the chametz aspect of it, you have to wash. But there's another consideration why you have to move fast, is because the Vilna Gaon says you should try to get in one more meal before 10:21. What will that meal be? Now that you do another meal, it's going to be shalosh shudas. That can be yoseh shalosh shudas in the morning. That's the shaila. It's interesting that the Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah don't say you should do this. They concede the point that your shalosh shudas will be a different shalosh shudas. It will be in the afternoon. According to the Machaber, it will be egg matzah. It won't be chametz anymore, obviously. It can't be real matzah. According to the Ramah, it won't be with hamotzi. You're out of options at this point. And the only thing you can do is you can have other food, even fruit, and be yotzei shalosh shudas with fruit, or better, meat, eggs, whatever. But they don't say to split the meal. But the Vilna Gaon says, and the Mishnah Berurah brings this. So this is where it makes it more interesting, because you're working against the clock. So you have, and again, what I'm saying is this is the minhag, and this is what you should do. So your first meal, when you get home, make kiddush, make hamotzi, however you want to make hamotzi, have something cold. It's almost like a snack. Make sure you have enough egg matzah or challah to bench. You're done. That meal's done. Take a short break. Maybe take a walk. So now you left your house. Do something else. You can learn. The question is, it's interesting to talk about how long you have to have a break for. Nat, did you ever go into that? How long should the break be? So some say half hour, some say 15 minutes, and some say you don't really need much at all, because it's all for the sake of the mitzvah of shalosh shudas. The problem is, if you don't take a break, then you're orchestrating a third meal when maybe it wasn't necessary. It's so close to the second meal, so then you get into the realm of a bracha she'enas richa. Why am I making more brachas? I could have just had one meal. But this is the way to justify another meal if you have a hefsek, a break. So what I would do is I would walk outside. You leave your house, and that's your break. And there should be enough time. And you wash again. You're not making kiddush because you don't make kiddush for shalosh shudas, but this will be your shalosh shudas. You'll have again either challah or egg matzah. You got to keep your eye on the clock. 10:21 is the latest time here. And what do you eat? Now, if you want to continue this meal beyond the Sovzman Achila, the problem is you're getting rid of all the bread. Remember what I talked about? All the bread is off the table. You don't go back to bread. So then what gives you the right not to make new brachos? It's a Hilchos Suda issue. So in the interest of time, just trust me, is that it's not really going to be a big meal either. It's just going to be another meal. It's a meal to be yotzei shalosh shudas in the best way possible, which is with hamotzi. It's a quick meal. What are you eating? Whatever you want to eat. It could even just be the bread, the challah. But when I go to downstairs every week, and you should be careful, shalosh shudas. That's the Gemara Masechta Shabbos and Kuf Yud Ches, and it spares the person from the terrible things, right? You should wash and make hamotzi. But I don't eat, even though I think it's a nice shalosh shudas we offer. I see people like the tofuti cuties, and they like, the chips and everything else. You know what I eat? I just eat. I make sure I eat enough challah. I'm happy with that. So that's all you have to do now. If you want more, you can have more. But that's not going to be really your main meal. Think about it also practically. It's pretty early. It's only 10:20. Do you usually eat your Shabbos Suda at 10:21 so early? I know the people who daven at Tashkama Minyan do. But that's an early time to eat. So this is just to get in Shalosh Shudas in the best way possible. And the Mishnah Berurah advises it. So get that in. Bench. Stop eating chametz. Stop eating egg matzah at 10:21.
But you stop eating egg matzah prior to 10:21. Can you continue your suda and bench and eat fruit for another hour? Just say and then bench.
So you have to keep in mind you're still on the clock because you have to get rid of the crumbs.
So you
don't have a lot of time. And if you're Moshe Chiyad Min Apas, if now the bread is gone because you can't eat it anymore, so then maybe it'll be shilos with brachos. Right. So instead of continuing the meal, end it. And now you got shalosh shudas in. I told you, you're not going to have a regular Shabbos where my second meal. It's brought down in the poskim. Well, the first meal of the morning is a chashuv meal. That's the most important meal of Shabbos, by the way. Out of the 3 meals of Shabbos, which is the most important meal that should be the most lavish meal? The second. So practically, you really don't have that because you don't have the time. Some say you have some cold meat. Okay, if you want to have cold meat, have cold meat. But it's fat. The Mishnah Berurah says cold, not hot, not the chunk yet. We'll get to that in a moment. So I would say bench. You finish your 3rd meal of Shabbos. It's before 10:21. Okay, you're done with chametz. Make sure you have enough time to wash out your mouth. You have bread, even egg matzah. Wash it. It's not as critical, but wash out your mouth. Make sure that there's nothing clinging to your clothes. Now you have about an hour plus until 11:38. What are you going to do now? What do you do in this last hour? Now you're going to have to make sure you get rid of the crumbs, right? Dispose of them. And that's where you sweep up and you flush them down the toilet. And you dispose of all of the utensils and everything. Shouldn't have really chametz on it because we advised that it should be Pesach food. And you dispose of that. And Nat said, and this is critical, you have to say kol chamira. You didn't say it yesterday when you burned the chametz because you were still dealing with chametz. We just went through that. But now you have to say kol chamira. That's why you have to be alert and focused on the clock and also to say kol chamira. Now that you did that, now you can breathe a sigh of relief because now you had your 3 meals, you took care of Lechem Mishnah, and it's only 11:38, and you have the whole rest of the day of Shabbos. You might be hungry because you didn't eat that much. So here's where the Mishnah Berurah says that they would serve chamen. You're supposed to have cholent on Shabbos, something hot, right? To prove that you're allowed to have hot food on Shabbos, right? We don't start the fire on Shabbos, but we have hot food on Shabbos. So later, a little bit later, whenever you want, after you took care of the bittul and you cleaned your house, so now you can have, let's say the Pesach the cholent, you can have more food. That's fine. The only thing you have to be aware of now is that you don't want to fill up too much so that you spoil your appetite for the matzah and for the seder. And that is a halacha that kicks in at what time? At the beginning of the 10th hour, which is around 4 o'clock. I think it's 4:09. So around 4 o'clock, then if you can still eat, but whatever you eat should be light.
After 4.
After 4. By the way, when you have more food in the afternoon, whenever it is, let's say before 4 o'clock, what will that be? You'll say, well, I already took care of all of my sudos for Shabbos. Not necessarily, because if you hold that Shalosh Shudas can only be fulfilled after Mincha Gedola, after 6.5 hours into the day, so this will be your Shalosh Shudas, which was really the advice of the Mechaber and the Ramah. So you're going to eat again. But you see how there's no way that you're going to really have your best meal. It's not advised that you're going to have your best meal as the first meal of the day with the cholent and the chamet. I'm not saying you can't do it, but that's not the way it is preferred. Meaning a person shouldn't be, as they say in Yiddish, an ober chacham. I'm going to outsmart, the system. This has already been something that has been dealt with since the beginning of the calendar. You have the poskim. So what we share tonight, this is the way to do it. Now, it's a lot of information. Happens to be that in 1994, I worked on this, and I have a special guide, and I tinkered with it over the years, and I'm going to send it out again. I guess I could have sent it out before this year, but either way, you don't need to know it yet. But now that we have the shir, so a lot of it is really contained within the guide. Everything you need to know how to negotiate this, navigate, it will be in the guide. What's interesting, and we're almost done, we'll conclude. What's interesting is what happens if a person, let's say, has a lot of chametz and he can't dispose of it by flushing it. What does he do? If he forgot to sell his chametz and he has the whiskey what does he do now? When it's Shabbos, you have less options. What do you do? That's something that's discussed. Maybe something a little bit less severe. What happens if a person wakes up late? Davening is at 6:45. Let's say he wakes up at 9:30. He doesn't have a lot of time. I guess you could daven very quickly and still try to, but let's say he wakes up at 10 o'clock. It's not unheard of, right? I have people watching this right now who they wake up late. Let's say they wake up and it's 10 minutes before the Sodas Manachilo. They didn't daven yet. So what is going to be compromised? Is chametz going to be compromised? No. You're not getting chametz after 10:21. You and say, I'll eat the Shabbos Suda before I daven. You're not supposed to. That's not really an option. But if I daven first, it'll be too Mishnah. The easy answer is you woke up late. You'll eat, but you won't be able to make hamotzi. You won't have lacha Mishnah. He blew it. Or if it was an onus, it was beyond his control. They talk about maybe egg masa could still be an option after 10:21, because again, it's not chametz. It's a minhag not to eat egg matzah. Those who have a hard time digesting, older people, infirm people, they're mako with egg matzah over the course of Pesach. So maybe that's an option. That's another shaila that comes up. We talked about mechiras chametz, how to structure it. I would say that if you don't want to split the meal, you have what to rely on. Many argue that you don't have to split the meal. So you just have one meal in the morning before Sozman Achilas Chametz, before 10:20, and worry about Shalosh Shudas in the afternoon. Meaning, not to worry, but you'll address it. You just won't make hamotzi. So it's not that everyone has to do this, but if you're careful to wash for Shalosh Shudas, and you should be, this is what's suggested. It's the only way to cover your bases, to wash in the morning a third time, meaning in total, and then to have more food in the afternoon. We can adjourn. If you have any questions for the people here? Anything else you want to?
We can ask them.
Well, let me just check. I did everything without looking down. Preparing for the Seder. Is that what you're going to ask?
Yeah, about measuring out the.
Right, so that has to be done. That has to be done Erev
Friday.
Shabbos.
Thursday, Friday.
Right, that has to be done Erev Shabbos. Because one thing for sure is that you can't do the Hachana for the Seder on
Right,
Shabbos.
you can't do Tachana.
So if you didn't do it Erev Shabbos, you're going to have to do it Motzei Shabbos.
Right,
And it's unfortunate because it's going to take time and it's going to delay the Seder.
One other Chachana question. And that was, if you normally take a nap on Shabbos afternoon, so you take a nap on Shabbos afternoon, and we were having a discussion and you say, oh, I'm gonna take a good nap because I want to be awake for Seder. That would be, and you don't normally take a nap on Shabbos.
So it's
afternoon,
interesting.
it'd
The
be up
poskim
on
say
question.
the poskim say it's a Hilchos Yontif point because you can have this argument. It's not only in this scenario. You have Yontif that falls out on Mosai Shabbos. You can also, when it comes to the second Seder, right? So when you have the first night is Friday night, and say I'm going to take a nice Shabbos nap first day of Pesach, so I can be up
For this,
for the second Seder. It's the same issue.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's the benefit.
Right.
Everyone points that out. When was the last time you took a nap on Erev Pesach? Maybe if you're in the hotel, right? If you're making Pesach, the kids should take a nap. But because it's Shabbos and it's a Hachana issue, so you should not say.
not make it that.
You can think it, but you don't say it. All right. So that's a good way of ending this year. But if you have any questions, you can always contact me. And what I said, it's not the absolute only way, but it's the way, again, that's advised, and it's a way that will lead to the least amount of complications, and not to take for granted the benefit of disposable and the benefit of being outside and not bringing the chametz in, the benefit of having the Seder set, the table set prior to Shabbos, all of that will, and have everything prepared prior, that only will make it easier. But to some extent, because it's so unusual, as I said, you have to be alert and focused, and you have to be aware of the zmanim, and also to clean up after the first meals, or at least the first meal, the one meal that you wash in the morning. You have to make sure that you take care of it. And the kol chamira, that's important. Okay, we're going to adjourn, and I thank everybody who attended in person and who are watching, and it will be recorded, so it's there to refer to. And thanks to Jason Baver, who did all of the technical preparation.